Marcus was just 12 years old, a bright boy with a heart full of kindness. He lived in a neighborhood where things were not always easy. People were always rushing, struggling, and often keeping to themselves. His mother worked hard every day, doing 2 jobs just to make sure he and his little sister had food on the table. His father had been gone for a long time, and Marcus didn't like to talk about it. But despite everything, he stayed hopeful. He loved playing basketball at the community court and dreamed of making it big one day. One evening, after finishing a game with his friends, Marcus was walking home alone. The sun was setting, and the streets were quieter than usual. As he walked past a row of parked cars, he heard a strange sound, a struggle, a heavy thud, and a woman's voice crying out. He stopped in his tracks and turned toward the noise. There, near a police car, he saw a woman on the ground. She was wearing a police uniform, and her hat had fallen off. A man was standing over her, looking like he was trying to grab something from her belt. The woman looked like she was in pain, struggling to get up. But what caught Marcus's attention most was that she was pregnant. He could see it clearly now, her belly round and heavy. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the life inside her. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he had to do something, but he was just a kid. The man was big, and Marcus had never been in a real fight before, but he couldn't just walk away. He looked around, hoping to see someone else who could help, but the street was empty. If he didn't act now, something bad could happen. Taking a deep breath, Marcus shouted as loud as he could, "Hey, stop!" His voice echoed through the street. The man turned to look at him, startled for a moment. Marcus didn't wait. He ran straight toward the police car and grabbed the radio from where it was clipped on the side. He had seen enough movies to know what to do. Pressing the button, he spoke fast, his voice shaking. "Officer down. Help. Near Green Street." The man's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected anyone to interfere, especially not a kid. He took one step toward Marcus, but now, with his heart racing, Marcus did something even bolder. He grabbed a rock from the ground and held it up like he was ready to throw it. His hands trembled, but his eyes stayed locked on the man. For a second, everything was still. Then, in the distance, the sound of sirens broke the silence. The man hesitated, looking around. He knew backup was coming. Without another word, he turned and ran down the street, disappearing into the shadows. Marcus dropped the rock, his hands sweaty and shaking. He rushed to the officer, who was still on the ground, breathing heavily. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of worry. The officer, whose name tag read Daniels, looked at him with tired but grateful eyes. You called for help," she whispered, nodding weakly. Marcus nodded, and just then, flashing blue and red lights filled the street. The police cars screeched to a stop, and officers rushed toward them. One of them knelt beside Officer Daniels while another looked at Marcus in shock. "You did this?" one officer asked. Marcus swallowed hard and nodded again. He had never been more scared in his life, but at that moment, he had done the right thing. He had saved someone, maybe even 2 lives that night. Marcus stood frozen as the flashing police lights painted the street in blue and red. His heart was still racing from what had just happened. The officers rushed to help Officer Daniels, who was still on the ground, holding her belly and breathing heavily. One of the officers knelt beside her. "Daniels, are you okay?" he asked, concern clear in his voice. She nodded weakly. "I think so, just shaken up." Then she looked up at Marcus, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite understand. Was it gratitude? Amazement? One of the officers turned to Marcus. "Did you call for backup?" he asked. Marcus swallowed hard and nodded. I saw her on the ground. She needed help." The officer gave him a long look before patting his shoulder. "You did good, kid. Really good." Before Marcus could respond, another officer ran up. The suspect took off down the alley. "We're searching the area now," he reported. Marcus turned his head in the direction the man had run. His stomach was still tight with fear, but he felt a small sense of relief knowing the police were handling it now. He had done his part. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels was trying to sit up. Marcus noticed how carefully she held her belly, and he suddenly remembered. She wasn't just any officer. She was pregnant. He stepped forward without thinking. "Do you need help?" he asked softly. She gave him a small, tired smile. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, surprising him. He hadn't told her his name yet, but maybe one of the officers had. "I think I just need a moment." More officers arrived, and soon an ambulance pulled up. A paramedic checked Officer Daniels, asking her a few questions. "The baby's okay," she reassured everyone after listening with a small device. "Just some bruises, but we should take you to the hospital to be sure." Officer Daniels nodded, looking back at Marcus. "Will you be okay getting home?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. He hadn't thought about that. His house wasn't too far, but after everything that had happened, the idea of walking alone in the dark didn't feel right. One of the officers seemed to notice his hesitation. "We'll give you a ride," he offered. Marcus nodded, suddenly feeling exhausted. He climbed into the back of the police car, his mind still spinning. He had never been in a police car before. He had always seen them driving around the neighborhood, but sitting inside felt different. As they drove, the officer in the front glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You were really brave back there," he said. Marcus shrugged. I couldn't leave her like that." "That kind of thinking is rare," the officer said. "Most people would have kept walking." Marcus looked out the window, his thoughts swirling. He hadn't really thought about it. He had just acted. But now, looking back, he realized how dangerous it had been. What if the man had come after him instead? What if the police hadn't arrived in time? A shiver ran through him, but he pushed the thoughts away. It was over now. When they reached his house, Marcus saw his mother standing outside, worry etched on her face. The officer had called ahead to let her know what had happened. As soon as Marcus stepped out, she pulled him into a tight hug. "Baby, are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. Marcus nodded against her shoulder. "I'm fine, Mom." The officer smiled at the scene. "Your son is a hero tonight," he told her. "He saved one of ours." His mother looked at Marcus with wide eyes, then back at the officer. "Thank you for bringing him home," she said, her voice thick with emotion. As the police car drove away, Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions. He was glad Officer Daniels was safe, but something told him this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The next few days were a blur for Marcus. He couldn't stop thinking about the night he had helped Officer Daniels. It wasn't like he expected any kind of special treatment. He wasn't looking for praise or attention. He just did what he felt was right. But things were different now. The whole neighborhood seemed to be talking about what had happened, and Marcus couldn't walk to school without people nodding at him, some even calling him a hero. It was a lot to take in for someone who had always just tried to stay out of the spotlight. The news covered the story too. The local TV station aired a short clip of the incident, showing Marcus calling for backup and holding the radio while the suspect fled. It wasn't much, just a few seconds of footage, but it made Marcus uncomfortable. He didn't like the attention, and he didn't want people to think he was trying to be a hero. He was just doing what he hoped anyone would do if they saw someone in trouble. That afternoon, as Marcus walked home from school, a police car pulled up beside him. He froze, thinking something had happened. Maybe they needed to talk to him about the incident again. But when the window rolled down, it wasn't just any officer. It was Officer Daniels herself. "Hey there, Marcus," she called out with a smile. He blinked in surprise. "Oh, hi, Officer Daniels," he stammered, not expecting to see her. She waved him over, and he approached the car hesitantly. She leaned over and opened the passenger door. "Want a ride home?" she asked. "I promise, no more action-packed rescues today." Marcus chuckled nervously. feeling a little embarrassed. He had never really talked to a police officer before, let alone one who had been in such a dangerous situation. He wasn't sure what to say, but he nodded and climbed into the car. As the car started moving, Marcus looked out the window, his mind still racing. Officer Daniels was quiet for a moment, then spoke again. "You know, Marcus, I've been thinking about what you did," she began, her voice serious but kind. "What you did that night, it wasn't just brave. It was rare." Marcus glanced at her. "I didn't do anything special. I just called for help." Officer Daniels smiled, but there was something in her eyes that made him realize she wasn't saying that to make him feel better. "You didn't just call for help. You stood up. You didn't run away. You made sure someone else got help." She paused for a moment, her gaze shifting to the road. "People don't always do that, Marcus. It's easy to turn your back, to pretend you didn't see something happening. But you didn't. You did the right thing." Marcus looked out the window, his cheeks warming. "I just didn't want her to get hurt." "I know," she said, her voice softening. "And you saved her, Marcus. But more than that, you saved her baby too. You gave her the chance to get help before things got worse." Marcus felt a little awkward, not used to this kind of praise. But he also felt something else. He felt proud, not in a boastful way, but in a way that made him understand that his actions had actually made a difference. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. As the car approached his street, Officer Daniels spoke again. "I don't know if you realize it, but you did something that night that goes beyond bravery. You gave hope to a lot of people, people who might have lost faith in others. It's not just about saving lives. It's about showing people that there's still good in the world." Marcus swallowed. He wasn't sure how to respond. He was just a kid who had made a quick decision in a scary moment. But hearing it from her made him realize how much his simple act had meant. As the car pulled up to his house, Officer Daniels smiled at him. "I'll let you get back to your family, but I just wanted you to know that what you did meant more than you think." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. He had never thought of himself as someone who could make a real difference, but maybe he had, just by doing what felt right. "Thanks, Officer Daniels," he said quietly. She gave him a warm, encouraging look. "Take care, Marcus. You're a good kid." As the police car drove away, Marcus stood there for a moment, staring after it. For the first time, he felt like maybe he wasn't just a kid from a tough neighborhood. Maybe, just maybe, he had something special to offer. Something bigger than basketball. Something that could change not just his own life, but the lives of others. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's life began to change in ways he hadn't expected. He was still just a regular kid, going to school, hanging out with his friends, and playing basketball in the park. But now there was something different about him. People seemed to notice him more, even if they didn't always say anything. The respect in their eyes when they looked at him was subtle, but Marcus could feel it. It wasn't just because of the night he helped Officer Daniels. It was because he had done something that most people wouldn't have. He had stepped up when it mattered. But as much as Marcus tried to ignore the attention, he couldn't avoid the questions. His friends asked him about it at school, and even some of the teachers wanted to know what had gone through his mind in that moment. It wasn't easy to explain. He hadn't really thought it through. He had just reacted. But he tried his best to answer honestly, even though he wasn't sure how to put his feelings into words. One afternoon, as Marcus was walking home from school, he was stopped again. This time, it wasn't a police car that pulled up beside him. It was Officer Daniels, but this time she wasn't alone. There was another woman in the passenger seat. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had seen the woman before. She was one of the community leaders who had worked on several neighborhood projects. Her name was Mrs. Harper, and she was known for helping families in need. "Hey there, Marcus," Officer Daniels called with a smile as she rolled down the window. "Got a minute?" Marcus felt a little nervous but nodded. "Sure, Officer Daniels. What's up?" Mrs. Harper smiled at him. "I've heard a lot about you, Marcus," she said warmly, "and I wanted to talk to you about something." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't done anything that special, had he? Why were they talking to him? Mrs. Harper continued, "You've shown us that you care about your community and that you're willing to step up when it counts. That's a rare thing. We want to see how we can help you and your family, Marcus. We know things haven't been easy for you." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Wait, what do you mean?" "I mean that we want to help," Officer Daniels said, her voice gentle. "I've been talking to Mrs. Harper, and we've both been working on some projects to support families in the neighborhood. We think you and your family could really use some of the resources we have." Marcus felt a wave of emotions, confusion, surprise, and a little bit of hope. He hadn't expected anything like this. It felt strange to be talking to these women, who were so much more involved in the community than he was. But at the same time, there was a part of him that wanted to know more. "You see," Mrs. Harper said, "Marcus, your mom works so hard to take care of you and your sister. She's doing everything she can, but we know it's not always enough. We have resources that could help with things like housing, education, and even job opportunities. We want to make sure you have the chance to succeed." Marcus's mind was racing. He had never imagined anyone wanting to help his family in such a big way. His mom worked so hard, but things were still tight. They barely made it through each month, and he knew his mom worried a lot. He had seen her look tired, always trying to keep everything together. And yet, no matter how hard she tried, things never seemed to improve. "I don't know what to say," Marcus whispered. "You don't have to say anything yet," Officer Daniels said with a smile. "We're here to listen. We want to know what you need and how we can help." For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like someone really understood. It was one thing to receive help from people in the neighborhood, but this felt different. This was real, practical help from people who wanted to see his family succeed. After that conversation, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about it. The next evening, after his mom came home from work, he couldn't wait to tell her. When she walked through the door, tired but smiling, he rushed to her. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today." His mom raised an eyebrow but smiled. "What's going on, Marcus?" He told her everything, about Officer Daniels and Mrs. Harper, about the resources they had, and about how they wanted to help. At first, his mom just stared at him, unsure if she had heard him right. "You mean they want to help us?" she asked, her voice quiet with disbelief. Marcus nodded. "Yes, Mom, they really do." Tears filled his mother's eyes as she pulled him into a tight hug. "Marcus, I don't know how to thank them." "Mom, they want to help because they believe in us," Marcus said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. He wasn't sure where this newfound strength was coming from, but it felt good. "And I think we can do something with this. We can make things better." A few days after the conversation with Officer Daniels and Mrs. Harper, Marcus noticed that things at home started to feel different. The weight that always seemed to hang in the air, his mom's tired sighs, the long hours she spent away from home, the constant worry about bills, was starting to lift just a little. His mom had signed up for a community program that Officer Daniels and Mrs. Harper had mentioned, and already there were people coming by to help. A group of volunteers worked on small repairs around the house, fixing leaks, patching up holes in the walls, and even planting flowers in the yard. Marcus couldn't believe how quickly everything was coming together. It felt like his family was being lifted up by people who cared. And it wasn't just the house that was changing. His mom had started attending job training workshops, something she'd never had the time for before. It was a small but powerful step, one that brought a new kind of hope into their home. It wasn't just his mom's life that was improving either. Marcus was beginning to feel the changes too. His schoolwork, which had always been a bit of a struggle, started to come easier. The community center offered free tutoring sessions for kids who needed extra help, and Marcus had started attending after school. It was something simple, but it made a big difference. One afternoon, While he was doing his homework at the kitchen table, his mom came over to sit beside him. She smiled at him as she took a seat. "How's it going, Marcus? Is everything okay with your homework?" Marcus looked up from his math problems and nodded. "Yeah, Mom, I'm doing fine. Actually, I think I'm getting better at it." His mom chuckled softly. "I'm glad to hear that. You know, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's been happening lately. You really did something special that night, Marcus. You didn't just save Officer Daniels, you saved us too. I don't know where we'd be without the help we're getting now." Marcus felt his cheeks warm up, but he wasn't sure if it was from the compliment or the overwhelming feeling of gratitude that seemed to fill the room. "I didn't do it for any of that," he said softly. "I just wanted to help her. She was pregnant, and I didn't want her to get hurt." His mom's smile grew, her eyes full of pride. "I know, baby. And that's what makes it so special. You did it because you care. And that's what matters the most." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the noise of the neighbors and cars passing by outside filling the background. It was peaceful, different than before. But Marcus couldn't shake the thought that lingered in his mind. Officer Daniels had been right when she said that his actions had gone beyond bravery. He hadn't fully understood it at the time, but now, looking at how everything was falling into place, he realized how much of an impact his decision had made. It wasn't just about one night. It was about making a choice that changed the course of things for the better. A week later, Marcus got a surprise. After school, as he was heading home, he was stopped by the same police car that had picked him up that night. This time, Officer Daniels wasn't alone. She had another officer with her, a friendly-looking man with a big smile. "Hey, Marcus," Officer Daniels called out, waving at him from the car. Marcus approached the car, a little curious. "Hi, Officer Daniels. What's going on?" "This is Officer Stevens," she said, gesturing to the man beside her. "He's one of our community outreach officers. He wanted to meet you and thank you personally for what you did." Officer Stevens smiled and nodded. "I heard a lot of good things about you, Marcus. You're the reason Officer Daniels is here with us today. We're really proud of you." Marcus felt a little shy but smiled back. "Thanks. We've been talking," Officer Daniels continued, "and we think there's something else you could do for the community. There's a youth leadership program starting up, and we'd love for you to be a part of it." Marcus blinked, surprised. "A leadership program? Me?" Officer Stevens nodded. "Yes, you, Marcus. We think you've got the potential to inspire others the way you inspired us. It's a chance for you to grow even more and help others in your community. You've already proven that you can make a difference." Marcus felt a rush of excitement. It was a chance to do something bigger, to be a part of something that could really impact his neighborhood. It was a chance to keep moving forward, to grow, and maybe even help other kids like him see that they could make a difference too. I'd love to be a part of that," Marcus said, his voice filled with newfound confidence. "Great," Officer Daniels said, beaming. "We'll be in touch with more details soon. Just know that we're really excited about having you join us." As the police car drove away, Marcus stood there, his heart racing with anticipation. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind for Marcus. He had been invited to the youth leadership program, and every day he learned something new. It wasn't just about leadership. It was about responsibility, making choices that affected not just him, but everyone around him. It was about understanding the power he had to influence others and how to use that power for good. The program was held at the community center, and each session was filled with lessons, discussions, and team-building activities. At first, Marcus felt a little out of place. There were kids from all over the neighborhood, many of whom he didn't know. Some of them were older, and some seemed much more confident than he felt. But every time he walked into the room, Officer Daniels was there, ready to guide them. She had become a mentor to Marcus, and she often pulled him aside to give him advice. One day after the class, Officer Daniels approached Marcus with a smile. Hey, I saw you working hard on that last exercise. You're doing great. Marcus gave a small smile in return, but it was clear he still felt unsure about himself. Thanks, but I don't know. I don't think I'm as good as the others. Officer Daniels leaned down a little, meeting his gaze. Don't compare yourself to anyone else, Marcus. You have something special that they don't. Your heart. You care about others, and that's a rare quality. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but there was a small spark of confidence in her words. You really think so? I know so, she said. The choices you made when you helped Officer Daniels, those aren't just the actions of a brave person, they're the actions of a leader. You're already showing others what it means to make the right choice, even when it's hard. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of her words. For the first time, he started to believe that maybe he did have something to offer. He wasn't just a kid from a rough neighborhood anymore. He was someone who could make a difference. The program continued for weeks, and with each new lesson, Marcus felt himself growing. He became more comfortable speaking up, sharing his thoughts with the group, and even helping others when they struggled. He knew it wasn't just about becoming a better leader, it was about becoming a better person. He was learning how to manage his feelings, how to listen to others, and how to see the bigger picture. During one of the sessions, the group was tasked with organizing a community event. They had to come up with ideas to bring people together and make the neighborhood a better place. Marcus was nervous at first, but he didn't want to back down. He stood up, raising his hand to speak, even though his stomach churned with nerves. I think we should have a block party, he said, his voice shaky at first. We could invite everyone, have games, food, music, just something fun to get everyone talking to each other. The group was quiet for a moment, and Marcus felt his face flush. He thought they might laugh or brush him off. But Officer Daniels smiled and nodded. That's a great idea, Marcus. A block party could really bring the community together. With her encouragement, the group worked together to organize the event. They planned everything carefully, deciding on food, games, decorations, and even who would be responsible for what. Marcus found himself in charge of organizing the music. It felt like a big responsibility, but he was excited. He even started calling up local businesses to get donations for the event. Slowly but surely, the block party came together. The day of the event arrived, and Marcus was amazed at how many people showed up. Families, kids, and even some of the local officers came to join in the fun. There was laughter, music, and food everywhere. People were smiling, talking, and reconnecting in a way Marcus had never seen before. It felt like the whole neighborhood had come alive. As the sun began to set, Marcus found Officer Daniels standing by the food table, looking around at the crowd. You did it, Marcus, she said, her voice filled with pride. You made it happen. Marcus looked around, taking in everything. The kids playing basketball, the families chatting, the music in the background. He couldn't believe it. This was his idea. This was something he had helped create. I didn't do it alone, he said, glancing at the others who had helped make the event a success. We all did it together. Officer Daniels smiled at him, a knowing look in her eyes. That's the spirit of a true leader, Marcus. You see that? You didn't just organize a party. You brought people together. Marcus's heart swelled with pride. This wasn't just about the event. It was about what it meant. It meant his community was stronger. It meant he had helped make that happen. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he truly belonged. As the evening ended and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus's mom showed up, smiling from ear to ear. Marcus, she said, pulling him into a hug, this is amazing. I'm so proud of you. Marcus smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment he had never known before. Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without everyone's help. As they walked home together, Marcus felt like he was walking a little taller. He had done something big, and more importantly, he had made a difference. This was only the beginning. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind for Marcus. He had been invited to the youth leadership program, and every day he learned something new. It wasn't just about leadership, it was about responsibility, making choices that affected not just him, but everyone around him. It was about understanding the power he had to influence others and how to use that power for good. The program was held at the community center, and each session was filled with lessons, discussions, and team-building activities. At first, Marcus felt a little out of place. There were kids from all over the neighborhood, many of whom he didn't know. Some of them were older, and some seemed much more confident than he felt. But every time he walked into the room, Officer Daniels was there, ready to guide them. She had become a mentor to Marcus, and she often pulled him aside to give him advice. One day after the class, Officer Daniels approached Marcus with a smile. "Hey, I saw you working hard on that last exercise. You're doing great." Marcus gave a small smile in return, but it was clear he still felt unsure about himself. "Thanks, but I don't know. I don't think I'm as good as the others." Officer Daniels leaned down a little, meeting his gaze. "Don't compare yourself to anyone else, Marcus. You have something special that they don't. Your heart. You care about others, and that's a rare quality." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but there was a small spark of confidence in her words. "You really think so?" "I know so," she said. "The choices you made when you helped Officer Daniels, those aren't just the actions of a brave person, they're the actions of a leader. You're already showing others what it means to make the right choice, even when it's hard." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of her words. For the first time, he started to believe that maybe he did have something to offer. He wasn't just a kid from a rough neighborhood anymore. He was someone who could make a difference. The program continued for weeks, and with each new lesson, Marcus felt himself growing. He became more comfortable speaking up, sharing his thoughts with the group, and even helping others when they struggled. He knew it wasn't just about becoming a better leader. It was about becoming a better person. He was learning how to manage his feelings, how to listen to others, and how to see the bigger picture. During one of the sessions, the group was tasked with organizing a community event. They had to come up with ideas to bring people together and make the neighborhood a better place. Marcus was nervous at first, but he didn't want to back down. He stood up, raising his hand to speak, even though his stomach churned with nerves. "I think we should have a block party," he said, his voice shaky at first. "We could invite everyone, have games, food, music, just something fun to get everyone talking to each other." The group was quiet for a moment, and Marcus felt his face flush. He thought they might laugh or brush him off. But Officer Daniels smiled and nodded. "That's a great idea, Marcus. A block party could really bring the community together." With her encouragement, the group worked together to organize the event. They planned everything carefully, deciding on food, games, decorations, and even who would be responsible for what. Marcus found himself in charge of organizing the music. It felt like a big responsibility, but he was excited. He even started calling up local businesses to get donations for the event. Slowly but surely, the block party came together. The day of the event arrived, and Marcus was amazed at how many people showed up. Families, kids, and even some of the local officers came to join in the fun. There was laughter, music, and food everywhere. People were smiling, talking, and reconnecting in a way Marcus had never seen before. It felt like the whole neighborhood had come alive. As the sun began to set, Marcus found Officer Daniels standing by the food table, looking around at the crowd. "You did it, Marcus," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You made it happen." Marcus looked around, taking in everything. The kids playing basketball, the families chatting, the music in the background. He couldn't believe it. This was his idea. This was something he had helped create. "I didn't do it alone," he said, glancing at the others who had helped make the event a success. "We all did it together." Officer Daniels smiled at him, a knowing look in her eyes. "That's the spirit of a true leader, Marcus. You see that? You didn't just organize a party. You brought people together." Marcus's heart swelled with pride. This wasn't just about the event. It was about what it meant. It meant his community was stronger. It meant he had helped make that happen. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he truly belonged. The day of the award ceremony finally arrived. Marcus could hardly believe how far he had come. Just a few months ago, he never would have imagined that his life would be so different. The boy who had always felt like an outsider was now standing tall, surrounded by people who believed in him. The invitation to the ceremony was a big deal, and it was all happening because of the choices he had made. Not just the big, heroic act of helping Officer Daniels, but all the small decisions that had added up to something bigger than he ever expected. Marcus stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt, his heart racing. He wasn't sure if he was more nervous or excited. His mom had insisted on helping him get ready, making sure he looked his best. He hadn't been to many events like this before, but he knew that tonight was special. He wanted to look presentable, but more than anything, he wanted to be proud of himself for the person he had become. "You're going to look great," his mom said, giving him an encouraging smile. She was dressed up too, and her eyes shone with pride. "I'm so proud of you, Marcus. I knew you had it in you." Marcus smiled back at her. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done any of this without you." As they arrived at the ceremony, Marcus was amazed at how many people were there. The room was filled with bright lights, decorations, and excited chatter. Local leaders, community members, and even a few reporters were gathered, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Marcus felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. He had never been in a crowd like this before, and the attention felt overwhelming. But as he stood there, taking in the scene, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to find Officer Daniels standing behind him, her warm smile reassuring him. "You doing okay?" she asked. Marcus nodded, though his nerves were still jittery. "Yeah, just a little nervous." She laughed softly. "I get it. It's not every day you get recognized like this. But you deserve it, Marcus. You've earned it." His heart swelled with pride. Hearing those words from Officer Daniels meant more than he could put into words. She had been a constant source of support, a reminder that he was capable of achieving great things, even when he doubted himself. When the ceremony began, Marcus's name was called. He stood up, his legs feeling a little wobbly, but he kept his head high as he made his way to the stage. The applause was loud, and as he walked across the room, he saw his mom in the crowd, clapping and smiling. That was all the encouragement he needed. He walked with his chest out, his heart beating proudly in his chest. Standing on the stage, holding the award in his hands, Marcus looked out at the audience. It was a surreal feeling, seeing so many people there to honor him. But as he looked out at the crowd, he realized something important. This wasn't just about him. This wasn't just about the award. It was about the journey he had taken to get here. The challenges, the growth, the decisions he had made along the way. It was about the people who had supported him, from Officer Daniels to his mom, to the community who had rallied around him. The speaker introduced him, and Marcus stepped up to the microphone. His hands were shaking a little, but his voice was steady as he began to speak. "I'm honored to be here today," he started, looking out at the crowd. "When I first helped Officer Daniels, I didn't think it would lead to anything like this. I just wanted to do the right thing. But I've learned a lot along the way. I've learned that one decision, one act of kindness, can change everything. I've learned that I'm capable of more than I ever thought." There was a brief pause as Marcus gathered his thoughts, feeling the weight of the moment. "This award isn't just mine. It's for everyone who has believed in me, especially my mom. She's been my biggest supporter, and I couldn't have done any of this without her." The crowd applauded, and Marcus felt a sense of pride that was almost overwhelming. He had worked hard to get to this point, and now, standing before everyone, he knew that his journey had only just begun. "I also want to say thank you to Officer Daniels," Marcus continued. "She's shown me what it means to be a true leader, and she's been a mentor to me from the start. This award is as much hers as it is mine." Officer Daniels smiled proudly from the audience, and Marcus could see how much she appreciated his words. She had believed in him when no one else did, and now Marcus was returning that belief. When Marcus finished his speech, the applause was louder than before, and he could feel the warmth of the crowd's support. It was a moment he would never forget.